The name Dolby is synonymous with entertainment. For over 5 decades, they've pushed the boundaries of immersive technology. Now, new technology has not only allowed for new products to be developed and new human experiences, of course, but new ways of storytelling are emerging too. We're delighted to have Dolby's chief scientist with us next to talk about how technical advances are transforming entertainment. Please welcome to the stage, Crum.
Hello. That's quite an act to follow. Amazing. So I'm going to stand here with a smiling face and tell you about a master of human mind control. And this is someone maybe some of you know. He's controlled the minds of billions of individuals across centuries. And his techniques were so successful that his followers created manifestos describing his methods. And those methods have affected and been used by individuals for eras, centuries now, to orchestrate human experience. Anybody have an idea who I'm talking about? Pardon? Time. Time would make it. So I'm not talking about emotion, and Bach definitely understood how to have us experience emotions. But Bach was a master of understanding human experience and human perception. In particular, polyphony, and how our brain, unlike vision, where our brain is getting a representation of space that is any particular position in our environment is represented throughout our brain. With sound, it's different. You've got all these different sound waves that are intermixing, and your brain has to unpack them and then reassign them to create the experiences that we ultimately have. And that piece you just heard is one violin. And yet we hear multiple voicings. It's polyphony, right? So Bach controlled our mind. How he did it became the rules of counterpoint. That's the manifesto. And those rules of counterpoint, composers for centuries now have used basically to say, okay, they're like a recipe book, because there are so many different ways our brain can organize and unpack those frequencies and sounds to create different voicings. If I'm a composer, if I follow these rules, you as a human, you will experience sound in this way. But Bach wasn't unique in this. Great artists understand the brain and human experience and know how to use their tools to engage human perception in ways that neuroscientists and scientists spend centuries trying to understand. Similarly, the Angolese storytellers and musicians passed down stories and experiences that existed only in the delicate interplay of human perception. So I'll give you an example. You're going to hear 2 players. What each player is actually playing, I'll play for you first, and you'll notice it's an isochronous rhythm. It's like bum, 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 bum. And then we're going to put the 2 players together, and something very different, very magical comes out of that. And here's what the other player is actually playing. It's pretty straight. But what happens when we put them together? what you experience and the voicings you experience isn't coming from one player or the other. The parts that they carry on and take away with them and pass on through centuries. What you're hearing is your brain reorganizing that information into two different voicings that's based on how close the frequencies happen to be together, the sounds happen to be on some dimension. Our brain's constantly reorganizing those things, but artists and storytellers, in this case, they have this amazing understanding of the brain that gets passed on. And we spend so much time trying to describe that and trying to capture that. And so do these storytellers. These storytellers understand human experience and human perception in very sophisticated ways that as neuroscientists, we are always trying to capture. Now, Leo Tolstoy wrote an essay called What is Art? And in this essay, it's kind of funny because I get in a lot of arguments with different artists, but Tolstoy defined art specifically as it exists when the intent of the creator is experienced by the individual on the other end, right? These were Tolstoy's philosophical musings. But in fact, today, we can actually know what you're feeling. With the ubiquity of sensors in our environment paired with machine learning, we can understand the internal human experience and be able to tell what Tolstoy, sort of take Tolstoy's musings to a completely different level. What we breathe, just sitting in this room together. There's a chemical composition of our breath that's giving a dynamic signature and constantly changing as our heart speeds up and our muscles tense. And it's changing with our emotions. We can see joy, fear, suspense, all in the chemical composition of our breath, and without any overt behavior. So for example, in this particular slide, if you look at those signatures, okay, this is the carbon dioxide level of an audience watching the Hunger Games. And you see 5 different audiences, different times a day, different people, different individuals. And hopefully you see each one of those audiences looks a lot like the other. You can actually predict exactly where Katniss's dress catches on fire. How many people in the audience have seen Free Solo? Right, yeah. You know that as an audience, as the filmmakers, what they're trying to do is you feel something very intense during that film. So I wasn't actually able to be present when my team was doing this, but they were working with the filmmakers came in, and we captured the carbon dioxide levels of the audience watching Free Solo. I took a look at them, and it's pretty powerful. You can see every place where there's a climb, where Alex Honnold abandons his climbs. You can actually see the love story in the exhalant of our breath. The audience is broadcasting the signatures of what they're feeling, and we're doing that together. The chemical composition of our breath is constantly changing, but that's just one part of the story. So I'm actually, my background, I've been a technologist for about 9 years. I've been in the technology space for about 10 years now, 9 to 10 years. And before then, I was a computational neuroscientist. But the thing that we always thought we care about as neuroscientists is how do we take the physical world and understand the transformations that go through our bodies ultimately to create the perceptual realities that we each have that are so unique. And understanding how information gets modified, what information gets passed on, the information that gets lost, the kind of errors that happen in our system, that's the whole field of systems neuroscience that we care about. But it's really no different than what we do today. Because what I care about today is building tools that let creators create experiences that influence our emotions, touch our bodies, and get translated to something that is what they intended so they can tell their stories. And how do we most effectively translate that to know that what they've intended, what they've created, these rich emotional memories, are taking us to the next level and capturing it the way that they wanted to see. So the thing I want to tell you about is like how today there are so many transformations happening with our technology and our capacity that we are able to think about what that code for translating the human experience from the storytellers really is and taking it to a new level. It's not just about bits and pixels, but there's an emotional meaning in what they create that no matter who we are and where we're consuming that content, we want to make sure it's actually experienced. Because each of us is very different and has a very different experience of the world. So for example, I think most of you look at this image from NASA and might think about words like Earth, home. Some people say fragility, which I think is an important one to remember, climate change, beauty. So I'm in a planetarium about 2.5 years ago with my 2-year-old daughter at the time, and we're watching Journey to the Sun. And as typically happens when you're watching a show in a planetarium, you start in a busy city street like New York, and you zoom out on your way to the sun. And you see pass an image that looks a lot like this. Everything's quiet, everybody's quiet, and my daughter, as loud as she possibly could, yells, "Minions." Right. But makes sense, I guess, maybe not. Okay, but it does. Because I realized her experientially established prior of that image was coming from this one. As far as she's concerned, her physical experience of that piece of information is vastly different than ours, but it's based on her experientially established priors of the world and her underlying biology, and she sees the image of the earth and thinks of little yellow creatures, which is a great place to be with tolerance. But everything we experience, the statistical nature of our environments and dynamics of what we engage in the world affects how we each experience different information, the same information very differently. And what's becoming more important is that we have to be able to control and predict how we're experiencing that information, because a one-size-fits-all future is not good enough. It shouldn't be. We can know how people are experiencing things, and we can use that to assure that we're engaging the creator's intent and we're enabling capacity of human experience. So there are 3 things that I focus on and want to take you through how we can look at that today that's different. One is control. And when I say control, I'm not talking about bad control. I'm talking about control of just knowing how we are experiencing, how human perception works, and that the physical world isn't the one we care about. It's the one that goes through our bodies and all the different malleable transformations that happen that we need to be able to model. The other is insight. How do we know how someone is experiencing that information? What can we do to enhance it? And then how does that affect new tools for creation? So for control, let me give an example. I want you all to stare at the sunlight in the corner. Okay? If you're bubbles floating up and off the screen, and they seem to fly off the screen at an angle, right? So now shift your gaze to where the bubbles are. Okay? So when you shift your gaze to the bubbles, do you realize they're going straight up? Does everybody see that? Nod your heads. Yeah, you can shift your gaze back. You know the trick, but in fact, you experience it that way. This has to do with, what's going on is you have a horizontal gradient that's paired with a vertical motion, and when your gaze is directed on those bubbles, your brain separates those 2 trajectories. But guess what? When you're looking at the sunlight, your brain doesn't. And when those bubbles fall in your peripheral vision, your brain's integrating these 2 different trajectories, and you experience the world as some sort of integration. And it's different for every one of us. It makes you really terrified to get in an airplane after thinking about that, right? But the beauty here is, look, as a developer, I'm in a bad space if I don't know where you're looking. You have completely, vastly different experiences of the world, right? But one simple thing that's transformed in the last 15 years is the cost of like a pupil tracker, something knowing where my eye is directed. Just knowing that one piece of information that used to cost $30,000 in a lab 15 years ago and now costs dollars in every pair of smart glasses or every device we might be looking at is incredibly impactful to how we can think about understanding the perceptual experience. But we also have to gain insight. We have to know what you're experiencing to augment that information. Now, as humans, we're always a little touchy. We like the idea that technology knows what I'm experiencing on the inside and my internal state, my stressors, my feelings, my emotions. It makes us uncomfortable. But in fact, we already do share those things. We haven't changed as humans. The ubiquity of information in our environment and sensors paired with machine learning has changed. Now, for some creatures, this kind of exposure is just the norm. And in fact, they do this all the time. They show their biological interaction with the external world. And I personally think it's really amazing and quite beautiful. So bear with me. I'm a violinist, not a singer, but this is a spider in my garden, and I'm going to show you what I mean. All right. So I will actually tell you that my daughter now classifies spiders as the kind we don't touch and the kind mommy sings to. And she actually asked me to sing to a spider that was scaring her in the car the other day on the way to work, and I was like, oh, okay, I guess I can. But it's this really beautiful opportunity where biology is responding to the external world and revealing the inner one. Now, we think we're different than the spiders, but in fact, we're kind of the same in many different ways. So I want you to watch the diameter of your this pupil. There are 3 different ways your pupil can dilate. Your pupil might dilate because of changes in lighting, which just happened when we dimmed the lights that you're sitting here in. But it's also going to happen when you're engaged in content, when you're more engaged in a conversation. It'll happen also when your brain's having to work harder and you're experiencing what we call cognitive load. Now, it's your autonomic nervous system. So this is something we can't really turn off, but it's really quite beautiful. So watch the diameter of the pupil and try to understand the 2 talkers.
Intelligent technology depends on personal data. Intelligent technology depends on personal data. Intelligent technology depends on personal data. Intelligent technology depends on personal data.
All right. So your autonomic nervous system does that. Your eye is responding to the world around you, as are other biological signatures. And it can give us great insight to what you're actually experiencing. There are many other signatures. So what do people think? This happens to be, I'll tell you, it's a trace of the conductance of your skin, of someone's skin. Okay? And they're watching some content. Anybody have a guess what they might be watching? Anyone? All right. Someone got it out there. Football or soccer, depending on where you are. But what's beautiful here is what looked like a trace that didn't have any semblance or meaning. You can actually perfectly predict exactly where the penalty kicks are in this trace. Human anticipation in storytelling, or when you walk into a job interview, anything in that way, your body's reacting, and it's very difficult to turn off. These are just looking at, you might know this as a lie detector test, but it's picking these up changes in the conductance. And we want to have those feelings when we're engaged in experiencing our content. In fact, we can also look at the thermal dynamics of your body. Your bodies radiate your stories of how you're experiencing information. We can see engagement, we can see stress and cognitive load. In fact, when we were developing what we call Dolby Vision Ed, which is one of our new tools that's been around now it's been out for about 4 years, we were working with technologies that let us get up to 20,000 candelas per square meter. So just to give you some idea, your typical display you would have bought 5 years ago was 300 candelas per square meter. The natural moon, it is about 1 to 2,000. Sunlight on black pavement around 15,000 candelas per square meter. So there's this huge gap in what technology was providing and what the human physiological system is expecting. And so we were watching, I was actually watching some fire content on this research device that we had. And it was really amazing because this man whipped out a flame, and there was this, well, it didn't come out of the TV, it wasn't 3D, but there was this big specular highlight on the middle of the screen, and I felt my body react. And so my instinct was, okay, what's going on here? Is the display changing in heat, giving off temperature? It's changing its temperature? In fact, it wasn't. What was happening was we could use thermal scanners and capture that, the display was perfectly constant. But people were giving off heat. Their body was reacting to the content as if it were real. So just my knowledge of the fact it was flame, my body's saying, hey, I've never experienced fire that was that bright, and just based on the image reaching my retina, I'm going to react to it as if it is real. So when we think about storytelling and tools that we give our creators, number one is we want to engage as richly as possible the authentic human experience. Now, this is one of my favorite, to me it's one of the most powerful things that I've seen in a long time. Well, monkeys are really cute. I've spent a lot of years working with a lot of different species, but many of the ways we're understanding experience is, alone, and it's about, what does my body do? But we're social creatures, and some of the most powerful experiences we have are when we're together and how we interact together. So one of the species that I've worked with a lot in the past was a common marmoset. The marmoset is this really amazing, beautiful creature who's extremely social, and how social they are is a critical part of the success of their dynamics together. And in this case, these creatures, they live in the Amazon, in Brazil. And the problem is they're very social, but in fact, they live in an environment that they can't see each other. So what do? Unlike other monkeys that are very visual, these monkeys are very vocal. They have their vocalizations are like birdsong, but they have these pheromonal systems where the dominant female, her mental state affects the biology of all the other females in her proximity, just based on her role. And you can take one female out and have her in the same proximity, but a new role, and her mental state will affect the biology of all the other females. It's pretty amazing. Now, I'm not talking about human pheromones, but I am talking about the power of being human and together in experiences. And that's something we've been able to look at in a way that I think is just really amazing. Because what we've found is when you're having powerful emotional experiences, we actually synchronize our neural signatures. We feel things together, and I'm going to show you that data. First, before I end, I want to show a clip, and courtesy of Sony, I want you all to watch this clip of Baby Driver. Okay? Dim lights.
You know I gotta do the same.
All right. It's a really powerful scene. And what I'll leave you with is this. So we looked at the red traces are the neural coherence and biological coherence of people when they're watching this content or this piece of content in the same space. They're not interacting overtly, they're not talking, they're not doing anything. And the blue signature is when they're watching the content by themselves. You see huge changes in neural synchrony for different scenes, for the highly emotional scenes. We feel things together, and just being in the same space affects how we are experiencing the world. You really can be the life or death of the party just by being around other people. So remember that, because this is the power of why we're here at a conference like this, and we make the trips to be in the same spaces. It's why we will always go to the cinema, and why that experience is so different than a virtual experience that we're trying to hit. But when you're thinking about presence in VR and everything, what you have to be striving for is this. It's how we communicate when we are proximal, when we're together. And it's why music conferences and music, everything is about the human experience that we can take with us. Thank you so much.